Hi, my name is Mariam Azizi, and my question is to Mr. Alexander. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you for amplifying the voices of the voiceless, because I've seen your Twitter presence and your Instagram presence, and on behalf of all of the youth of Afghanistan, we sincerely appreciate your help. My question to you today is, what is the likelihood of Afghans being able to finally breathe? And by that I mean, when would Pakistan be sanctioned?
Thank you. This is Shakib Sharifi. I recently returned from Afghanistan. And I have a question from Chris. Chris, thanks for being a good friend of Afghanistan. I know Masood, when Ahmad Shah Massoud, our national hero, visited France in 2001, he had a dire message, and that was, if you don't help us fight, contain, and control terror in Afghanistan, they are capable and indeed they are willing to do the unthinkable, and the world will regret. My question is the following: how many more innocent lives in West, in New York, in London, in Madrid will it take for us to take action again? Thank you.
Well, if I'm going to comment on drugs, we're talking about illegal drugs. Australia produces opium. Other countries produce opium legally. Afghanistan was never brought into the World Consortium for opium production, which essentially laid down, turned it over to criminal syndicates. I would be looking a lot to Latin America and others that are saying, there's never been an insurgency that was paid for by coffee or tea or other things we ingest. To some extent, I think one of the problems that the world has created is by not really coming to grips with whole questions of narcotics and other things, and to what extent do negative policies of eradication, of illegalization that produce huge high profits actually finance trouble in places like Afghanistan. That tends to be somewhat of a radical position, but you know, the other major opium producers legally include Turkey, include India, and include Australia, none of which are particularly noted for having drug-based insurgencies.
Yeah, on that issue, as a bridge to the others, I agree with Tom. The old approaches will not work. I don't think US and other eradication policies in Latin America are very relevant for Afghanistan. And whether it is legalization or some other approach that leads to a transition away from opium as a source of criminal proceeds of crime and funding for terrorist groups, either option, the best option should be chosen. The reality today, as I think students of this past year will agree, is that opium certainly funded a certain number of crime bosses and corrupt officials in the old government. But this year, there was an absolute bonanza for the Taliban itself, as key drug dealers linked to them were let out of jail and so forth. So it's fed the conflict on every side, and it does need to be talked about. But there isn't, in my mind, much prospect of ending the conflict if the international community simply looks away as the DGISI takes a victory lap in Kabul. And he visited actually twice, once at the beginning of the set piece invasion, and then at the end, the first time was with Bajwa. And obviously the invasion was timed to go off right after foreign forces were scheduled to leave by the disastrous agreement of last year. That's a larger discussion. When will action be taken? I think the questioners have answered themselves. Not now. There's too much paralysis over humanitarian situation, over getting people out. There's a lot of embarrassment and a blame game that's going on, which is deeply unhelpful. but it's likely to continue for some time. And then there's this overall climate of isolationism. When things fall off the headlines these days, they fall very, very far. And it's very easy, I can say, as a politician now out of the game, that it's very easy to sell the idea of doing nothing. And even more so in the partisan conditions of Washington and other capitals. So what is going to actually lead people to take action? There is some action happening. There is a small but vocal group in the US Congress and other parliaments talking about these issues. There are officials that are very unhappy with the approaches their political leaders have been taking and will continue to advocate. And there's a diaspora and a group of policy people worldwide that see the issues clearly, that are going to keep speaking out. But what will it take to bring about action? There's going to have to be leadership. I would say there's more of a prospect of a European country or two, not the European Union as a whole, but European players taking a principled position with regard to the resistance and with regard to Pakistan, then there is a prospect of the US doing that anytime soon. But that kind of leadership, or Canada, that kind of leadership would be useful. And it would be better off if it came now, because as the other questioner implied, if action is not taken now in this period before Taliban totalitarian control is consolidated and new terrorist groups are brought into being, it will certainly be taken later when the attacks start to come. And I think we simply have to assume that that is going to happen. Assurances and wishful thinking to one side. So we can either take action now when we see it is the right thing to do and have the opportunity finally to act on principle together, or we take it later in the conditions of crisis as we did after 9/11, which would be a disaster.